Some lives are arranged so carefully that you forget to ask who arranged them. On her dresser that morning sat 2 pearl earrings bought with a month's wages by a man whose name she did not yet know.
I lied so you could leave.
That voice would not arrive for another 47 days. But the bomb-shelter door her father had built when she was 11 was about to open, in a different shape, in a man's hands, 2 states away. The dishes were always set the same way. The dresses were always the right length. The mourning was always done in private, where no one had to see it. Abigail Wexley was 56 the morning her husband's lawyer arrived with the last of the paperwork. She had been a wife for 32 years. She had been a widow for 11 months. She had been a daughter for 54. And she was not yet, in any honest sense of the word, herself. Beacon Hill, Boston, September of 1965. The maples on Chestnut Street were just beginning to turn, and the morning light came in through the lace curtains the way it had come in for 32 years, slanted and gentle, falling onto the Chippendale desk where Abigail Wexley signed the final pages of her late husband's estate. Mr. Beaumont Pelicane, senior partner of Pelicane, Marsh and Drowry, sat across from her in a charcoal 3-piece suit. His ox-blood portfolio rested on his knees the way a small dog might. He was being kind. He had been her husband's lawyer for almost 40 years, and he had learned the kindness that comes with bad news repeated. Pelicane told her, in that careful, clipped way of his, that this should be the last of it. The trust transfers were complete. The Brattleboro property, the orchard, the farmhouse, the barn, the 60 acres were fully in her name. There was, however, one small matter. From her mother's estate, not her husband's, he apologized for not having mentioned it years ago. The file had been misplaced during the reorganization in '59, and he had only located it the previous week. A sealed parcel, addressed in her mother's hand to a post office box in Brattleboro, Vermont, but never sent. The parcel itself, he said, remained in their vault. Abigail watched a maple leaf spiral past the parlor window. She did not ask what the parcel contained. She did not ask why it had not been sent. She had been raised by a woman for whom unsent letters were a form of household furniture, and she did not yet have the language to ask the questions she most needed answered.
Thank you, Mr. Pelicane. You have been very patient with me. Could you forward it to Brattleboro when I'm settled there?
Pelicane said, of course. The leaf landed on the cold flagstones of the small back garden. Inside the velvet box on her dresser upstairs, 2 small pearl earrings caught the same slanted morning light. Untouched. Perfect. Cold. After the lawyer's visit, Abigail unlocked her mother's dressing room for the first time since the funeral. The air inside smelled of pressed lavender and old face powder. The mahogany vanity was furred with 11 months of patient dust. A single hair, white as a winter sky, lay on the silver brush. She sat on the velvet stool. She lifted the lid of the small velvet box. The pearls inside were a faintly uneven pair. One held a tiny darker freckle near the drill hole, the way some pearls do, the way no 2 pearls ever quite agree. The gold posts were tarnished, the way 14-karat gold tarnishes when it has been kept in a box too long and the world has been kept out. Her mother had said those words to her on her wedding day in 1932. Wear these when you finally know who you are, not who they expect. Abigail had been 23. She had not understood the sentence then, and she had worn the earrings precisely once at the reception, and after that, the box had gone into a drawer for 33 years. She closed the lid. She opened it again. She did this 3 times. On the 3rd time, she did not close it.
33 years in a drawer. That is enough, perhaps. That is enough for one pair of pearls. That is enough for one woman. I am 56 years old. I have been a wife. I have been a widow. I have been a daughter who said yes when she was supposed to say yes, and no when she was supposed to say no. And I have not, in all that time, asked myself what the woman in this mirror would say if I let her speak. Mother, if you can hear me now, I am going to drive north. I am going to wear the earrings. I am going to let the woman who knows who she is begin to speak in the privacy of her own car. I do not know who she is yet, but I think she is in the glove compartment, somewhere between Beacon Hill and Brattleboro, waiting to be asked.
She slipped the earrings into the side pocket of her gray wool skirt and walked out of the dressing room and did not lock the door behind her. By dusk, she had decided, almost without deciding, that she would drive north. The orchard she had inherited, the farmhouse her father had bought in 1923, the barn with the sealed shelter her father had built when she was 11, the autumn before the war. She had not seen any of it since she was 21 years old. The next morning, on a crisp October Tuesday, the cream-colored 1962 Lincoln rolled out of Beacon Hill at 6:15. A small leather suitcase sat on the back seat. A road map of New England lay open on the passenger seat, weighted with her late husband's silver cigarette case. The pearls were in the glove compartment, still inside the velvet box. Route 91 ran north through Connecticut and into Massachusetts, and then crossed into Vermont with a low-covered bridge and a hand-painted sign. The October maples were at their highest pitch, scarlet and ochre, and a strange smoky orange that Abigail had not remembered, or had perhaps never let herself look at. She stopped at a roadside diner outside Greenfield. The diner had a swivel stool counter, a waitress with a coffee pot in one hand and a child's drawing taped to her apron. The mirror behind the cash register caught Abigail's reflection as she sat down. She put down her purse. She opened the velvet box. She fitted the pearls into her ears, one at a time, slowly, the way a woman threading a needle in poor light might. Her hands trembled. She had not worn them in 11 years. She studied herself in the mirror. The woman wearing those earrings did not look quite like Abigail Wexley of Beacon Hill, Boston. Not exactly. Abigail studied the mirror almost to herself, asking who this was. The woman looking back was more honest than she remembered, less protected. She did not yet know her name. A trucker in a green plaid jacket 2 stools down tipped his cap and smiled. Abigail blushed. She had not blushed in years, and she was startled to discover she still knew how. She asked the waitress, softly, for just the coffee, black. She drank it slowly. The pearls stayed in her ears the rest of the way to Brattleboro. the orchard came into view late in the afternoon. A sagging white farmhouse with a tin roof gone soft blue with age. A red barn that leaned just slightly to the east, the way an old man leans on his good leg. 60 acres of half-tended apple trees, the McIntoshes already mostly down, the northern spies still holding their last fruit like patient old ladies who had been promised a visitor. Abigail parked the Lincoln on the gravel circle in front of the porch. She stepped out. She breathed in, and the air smelled of cider, apples, and wood smoke, and something green and metallic she could not name. A woman appeared at the property line, on the far side of a low stone wall. She was broad-shouldered, 60-something. An iron gray braid pinned under a red bandana. A barn jacket 2 sizes too large for her. Mud-splattered rubber boots. A covered casserole dish balanced on her hip.
You must be the Wexley girl. I am Harriet Coggan. I run the dairy that joins yours. Brought you a chicken and dumplings. The stove in that house has not been lit since spring. I lit it for you this morning. You will not freeze tonight, but you will smell smoke for 2 days.
Abigail, taken aback, softening, said she was Abigail, that it was very kind, that she did not know how to thank her.
You can thank me by lasting the winter. I will be honest with you, dear. I have seen 6 different city folk try this orchard since the war. They do not last the winter. The cold finds the soft parts. You look soft.
Abigail, steady with quiet humor, said she would take that under advisement. Harriet warmed at that. All right, she said. I like that. We will get on, you and me. Harriet handed over the casserole, gave a single short nod, and walked back across the field. Abigail watched her go. The pearls were still in her ears. That night, Abigail walked the property for the first time. The October dark came down fast and clean. The orchard stood like a small congregation of patient witnesses. The barn door creaked when she pushed it open. Inside the barn, in the back left corner, behind a stack of feed sacks her father had laid down in 1955, she found the door. It was iron. It was painted the color of dried blood. It had a heavy chain padlock at the latch, and the chain was rusted into a single shape. The door was set into the dirt floor and tilted just slightly, like a cellar door, like a small angled grave that had been promised it would never be opened. The fallout shelter. Her father had built it in 1955, 10 years after the war, 3 months after the first hydrogen bomb test the family had read about in Life magazine. He had been a man who believed that love was a roof, that if you built the right walls, the right people could be kept safe inside them. He had died in 1958 without ever telling Abigail or her mother whether the shelter had stocked supplies, or what the combination on the padlock was, or what he had hoped for the family that would shelter there if the worst came. Abigail laid one hand on the cold iron. The metal was the temperature of a stone in November. She did not pull on the lock. She said very quietly, to no one, "Hello, Father." She walked back to the farmhouse with her hands still smelling faintly of rust. She slept that night in her mother's old upstairs bedroom, in the iron bed, under 3 quilts that smelled of cedar chests. She dreamed of nothing she could remember. 3 days passed. Abigail learned the location of the cistern. She learned that the kitchen pump needed 40 strokes before the water ran clear. She learned that the apple cellar had been mouse claimed since at least 1962, and she set about the business of reclaiming it with a broom and a brisk kind of stubbornness she had not known she possessed.
There is no one to set the table for. There is no one to ask me what time supper is. There is no one to pour me a small sherry at 6 o'clock, which I never wanted in the first place, and which I drank for 32 years because it was poured. I notice that I am not lonely. I notice that I expected to be lonely, and that I have, instead, been busy. The water from the pump tastes of iron and of the well my father dug in 1923. The kitchen smells of cold pine and a small ghost of last year's wood ash. I do not yet know how to live alone, but I notice that I have begun to learn. I notice that the learning is not the disaster I was told to expect. I notice that the woman with the pearl earrings on the dresser upstairs is the same woman who is washing the dishes now, and she is not, this evening, anybody's wife. She is only the person doing the dishes. I have not been only one thing before in 56 years. I find that I like it.
On the fourth morning, she heard an engine come up the dirt road. Slow, patient. A 1953 Ford pickup, forest green, with a faded white tailgate. It rolled to a stop at the porch. A tall, lean man stepped out of the cab. 68 years old, though he carried himself like a man who had decided not to count the last 10. Close-cropped white hair, a neatly trimmed white beard, denim overalls over a soft flannel shirt the color of old moss, a canvas tool roll slung over his shoulder, pale blue eyes that crinkled at the corners the way the corners of old paper crinkle with use. He took his cap off when he saw her at the door. He held it in both hands.
Mrs. Wexley, ma'am. My name is Silas Hollander. Fellow at the feed store. Name of Earl Pickett. Mentioned your barn needs a new sill plate on the south side. He thought you might want a man who could put one in for you before the ground froze. I would be happy to take a look. No charge for the looking. Charge only if I do the work, and only if you are satisfied when I am done.
Abigail, steadying her hand on the doorframe, said yes. Earl had mentioned a carpenter might come by. He looked at her. The look was a beat too long. Not impolite, not anything she could have named. But his eyes moved across her face the way a man might move his hand across a piece of wood he had been told to identify, looking for the grain, looking for the line. She was not wearing the pearl earrings that day. She had set them on the bedside table the previous evening and forgotten to put them back on. Silas Hollander glanced very briefly at her bare earlobes. Then he looked away. Then he looked back. The whole thing took perhaps 2 seconds, and Abigail noticed it, and Silas Hollander knew she had noticed it, and neither of them said a word about it. He said gently, "Pleased to make your acquaintance, ma'am." Abigail, composed, told him the barn was this way. Silas Hollander started work on the barn the following Monday morning. He brought his own tools, his own lumber, a thermos of black coffee, and a small enamel cup with a blue rim. He did not bring a watch. He did not appear to need one. Abigail watched him from the kitchen window the first day. He moved the way old craftsmen move. He measured twice. He paused often. He stood back and looked. He laid his hand flat against a beam and seemed to listen to it. He spoke to the wood under his breath, the way some men speak to a horse they are about to ask something difficult of. By the third day, she had stopped pretending not to watch. The day following, she carried a pewter mug of fresh cider down to him at the barn around 11. She had heated it on the stove. She had cut an apple into 8 quarters on a small white china plate. She had told herself, on the path between the farmhouse and the barn, that it was simply the polite thing to do. She had been raised in the polite thing to do. Silas accepted the mug with both hands, surprised, gentle. He told her softly that she should not have, but he was grateful for the company. The wood was patient, he said. It did not require conversation. A man could forget how to make it. She told him it was only cider, Mr. Hollander, and that she would have made it for herself. She had not been called grateful company in 11 months. She did not know what to do with her hands, so she folded them in front of her cardigan and stood beside the workbench and pretended to inspect a curled cedar shaving as though it were of grave horticultural interest. She asked, carefully, how long he had been doing this work, and whether he traveled the way Earl had said he did.
51 years, ma'am. Started in my father's shed in 1914. I was 17. I do travel. New England, mostly. Maine in the summer. Down to the Berkshires in the spring. Up through the kingdom in October. I have a route. The farms know me. I have a small house outside Bennington. I go home to in February, but I do not stay long. Houses are for people who plan to stay still. I have not been one of those people.
Abigail asked him if he did not get lonely.
I get quiet. There is a difference. Quiet is not the same animal as lonely, ma'am. A quiet man can hear the wood speak. A lonely man can only hear his own footsteps.
Abigail considered this. She had been a lonely woman for a great many years, and she had not previously understood that the loneliness had an accent. She had thought it was simply the temperature of being alive. Over the next 10 days, Silas Hollander finished the south sill plate. He replaced 2 rotted floorboards in the tack room. He noticed that the kitchen step was loose and quietly rebuilt it without being asked. He cut and sanded and mortised and dovetailed, and shavings curled around his boots the way leaves curl around the foot of a tree. On the 11th day, Abigail came down to the barn at lunchtime and found a small cedar bench standing beside the kitchen door. It was perhaps 4 feet long. It had 2 cleanly turned legs at either end, and a back rail carved with a single repeated curve that mimicked, very faintly, the shape of an apple in profile. There was no note. There was no signature. The bench simply stood there in the slanted October light, as though it had been there all along. And she had not noticed. She did not thank him. She did not know how. The next morning, at first light, she carried her coffee out to the bench and sat on it. The cedar smelled of itself. The bench creaked once, settling under her, then was quiet. Inside the barn, she could hear the soft, regular sound of his block plane working a long board. On the 2nd Saturday of November, Harriet Coggan invited Abigail and Silas to dinner at the dairy farm. She made roast pork and applesauce and a hot milk pie, and she lit 2 beeswax candles on the dining table and put on her good navy dress with the pearl buttons. Abigail dressed carefully that night, a dove gray wool dress she had brought from Boston. Stockings, low pumps, and, at the last moment, standing at the little vanity in the upstairs bedroom, she opened the velvet box and put on the pearl earrings. It was the first time she had worn them since the morning at the roadside diner outside Greenfield. She studied herself in the spotted mirror for a long moment. She did not blush this time, but her hands were not quite steady. Dinner went well. Harriet told 3 stories about her late husband, 2 of them about a duck named Cornelius. Silas laughed in the right places. He passed the gravy when he was asked to pass the gravy. He cut his pork with the careful symmetry of a man who used the same hands for cutting wood, and he did not speak unless spoken to. Between the main course and the pie, Abigail leaned across the table to pass Silas the small dish of pickled beets. The candlelight caught the small pearl earring on her left ear. Silas's hand stilled on his fork. His face did not move. His eyes, very briefly, went somewhere else.
Those are old. The earrings, ma'am. I work with old things for a living. I noticed them.
Abigail, after a beat, said quietly that they had been her mother's. Silas, after a moment, said almost reverently that her mother had been a woman of taste. Harriet, who missed almost nothing that happened at her dinner table, filed this small exchange away in the well-organized cabinet of her mind. Between the location of the spare lantern wick and the year the McGuire boys had broken her chicken coop, she said nothing. She poured Silas another half-glass of cider. The first real snow came on the 15th of November, 6 inches soft and powdery in the night. The orchard in the morning looked the way a sheet of paper looks before anything has been written on it. Silas came over from where he had been staying, a rented room above the feed store in town, and helped Abigail with the kindling. He showed her how to set the splitting maul. He showed her how to read the grain of a piece of pine so that the first strike opened it cleanly down the middle. Silas, patiently, told her not to muscle it. "The wood wants to open," he said. "You only have to ask it where." Abigail tried. The maul bounced. She tried again. The second blow split the round in 2, and the halves fell open onto the snow. Silas made a low, pleased sound and told her there, like that, that was exactly the way. By the end of the morning, her hands were blistered. Her right thumb had a long bloodline across the pad. She did not stop. She worked through the noon hour and into the early afternoon, and Silas worked beside her, splitting and stacking, and not commenting on the fact that her cardigan was unbuttoned, and her hair was coming down out of its chignon, and her cheeks were red from work, and cold, and something else she was not yet ready to name. When she finally set down the mole, Silas reached into the chest pocket of his flannel shirt and produced a small, clean square of cotton he had cut from an old shirt that morning. He took her right hand in his. He turned it over palm up. He pressed the cotton across the blister and tied it neatly with 2 short strips at the wrist. Silas told her quietly to soak it in salt water tonight, just warm, that it would close by morning. She had done good work today, he said, better than 3 men he had watched try it. Abigail, steady, but only barely, thanked him. That night, Abigail soaked her hand in a porcelain wash basin of warm salt water on the kitchen table. The blister had broken, The salt stung. She did not mind. She watched the small steam rise off the basin, and she thought, with a kind of slow surprise, that she had not been touched in almost 2 years. Not really touched. Her husband had grown ill in 1963. The disease had taken the touching first, then the talking, then the man. She did not sleep that night until almost 3.
I have not been touched in 2 years. Not the way he turned my hand over. Not the way a man might turn a small thing over to see whether the maker's mark was real. I do not know what that touching means. I do not know if it means anything beyond what it was, which was a piece of cotton, and a clean cut, and a tied knot at the wrist. But I know that I have not slept since he tied the knot, and that the not sleeping is not this time the kind of not sleeping I am used to. It is the other kind, the kind that is perhaps alive. I am too old to call it that. I am too old for the word that would name it. But I notice that I am noticing. I notice that I have been a closed window for a very long time, and that, this evening, somewhere small in the chest of me, a single pane has cracked, and the air, the strange, cold, cedar-smelling air of late autumn in Vermont, has begun to come through.
When she finally slept, she dreamed of cedar shavings and of a man's hand turning her hand palm up under a low slanting winter sun. Not long after, Mr. Pellicane telephoned from Boston. Pellicane's voice came through the heavy black receiver, hesitant, slightly apologetic. He hoped the winter was treating her reasonably. He apologized again for the delay. The sealed parcel from her mother's estate had been located. It sat on his desk now. He asked whether he should forward it to the Brattleboro post office. It was addressed in her mother's hand to a J.H., he said. The full surname was rendered only as an initial. Abigail asked him to send it to the general delivery box. Mr. Trell, the postmaster, she said, knew her by sight now. Mr. Pellicane's voice caught just slightly when he read that initial aloud. The catch was so small that anyone who had not known him for 40 years would have missed it. Abigail had known him for 40 years. She caught it. She did not say anything. She thanked him and asked after Mrs. Pellicane and hung up the heavy black receiver. She stood for a long moment in the cold farmhouse kitchen, looking at the receiver, listening to the snow come down outside. Something had moved across the surface of her mind and would not be put away. She said, very quietly, to the empty kitchen, the 2 letters, J.H. The packet arrived 2 mornings later. Augustus Trell, the Brattleboro postmaster, drove it personally up the dirt road in his small green panel truck because the package was heavier than the rural carrier's bag could handle, and because Augustus Trell had not had a proper reason to drive that road in weeks, and was glad of it. Gus called out a cheerful good morning. He had a heavy one for her today, he said. Boston return address, Pellicane and somebody. Looking important. He apologized that he could not come in for coffee. The route was behind. The cold had the trucks coughing. He told her to take care now and asked her to sign for it. Abigail thanked him and signed. Abigail carried the parcel up to her mother's old bedroom, the room that had begun to feel, almost without her noticing, like her own. She closed the door. She sat on the edge of the iron bed. She opened the package. Inside the brown paper was a buff manila envelope, sealed with an old wax seal. Inside the envelope was a packet of letters, perhaps 30 of them, tied with a length of cream-colored ribbon that had once been white. Every envelope was addressed in her mother's careful hand to the same name: Jonas Hollander, Brattleboro, Vermont. Rural free delivery, 3. The earliest postmark on the top envelope was September 1928. The latest was June 1944. None of the envelopes had ever been mailed. None of them bore a stamp. The name on the envelopes left Abigail whispering, the air going out of her, just that single word: Jonas. She untied the ribbon. Her hands were not steady. She opened the topmost envelope, which was the latest one, dated June of 1944. Her mother's handwriting had been the same handwriting for 50 years, and Abigail would have known it anywhere.
Jonas, I read in the Hartford paper this morning that you are gone. They printed your name in the column of war casualties. I do not know how to put down on this paper what that has done to me. I have stopped writing letters I will never send. I am going to keep writing them. I will keep writing until I die. I will leave them in a box. I will not tell my daughter. I will not tell my husband. But I will write them, Jonas, because the woman who did not choose you in 1928 was a coward. And the woman who is writing this letter in 1944 is still a coward, but she is at least an honest one.
Abigail's hand went to her ear and stopped halfway. She had not realized she was reaching for the pearl earring. She closed her eyes. She made herself breathe. She read 3 more letters. She skipped to the bottom of the pile, to the earliest one. September 1928. A young Rosalind Burnham, 24 years old, engaged for 2 months to Mr. Charles Wexley of Beacon Hill at her parents' arrangement. Writing to a fiddler named Jonas Hollander, whom she had met at a charity benefit at Symphony Hall in 1927.
Jonas, Mother says I cannot. Father says I cannot. They are not wrong by their lights. You have no money. You have no name. You play fiddle in church basements and bring me cottage flowers. And you bought me 2 small pearl earrings with a month of wages, because I said once that I like the simple ones better than the cut crystal ones. They're the most beautiful gift I will ever receive. I'm going to wear them on the day I marry Charles Wexley, because they will be the only honest thing I'm wearing that day. I love you. I will love you when I am old. I am sorry. I'm so very sorry. Please do not write back. If you write back, I will not be able to do what I have promised to do.
Abigail set the letter down on the quilt. She removed the pearl earrings from her ears, very slowly, the way a person removes something that has become suddenly heavy. She set them on the small wooden bedside table beside the kerosene lamp. Her hands were shaking now. She did not try to stop them. 2 small pearls, tarnished gold posts, bought with a month of wages, by a man named Jonas Hollander in 1928. Outside the bedroom window, the snow was coming down again, the kind of snow that makes a sound like sand inside a paper bag. Abigail Wexley sat on the iron bed with her mother's unsent love letters on her lap, and she did not move for a very long time.
You wrote them all, Mother. You wrote them for 40 years, and you never put one in the post. You sat at the breakfast table with my father, and you handed me the toast, and you taught me which fork was which, and you went upstairs at noon and you wrote a letter to a man whose name we never said in this house. And I learned the forks. I did not learn the question. I did not even learn that there was a question. You did not want me to. You wanted me to live the answer you had given. And the answer worked. And the answer was a small, clean room with the lights on the right side and the curtains the right length and nothing alive at the center of it. I should be angry. I am, perhaps, angry. But also, Mother, I think I am only finally meeting you. At 56, with your earrings on the bedside table, with your handwriting on my lap, I am meeting you. I do not know yet whether I will forgive you, but I am meeting you, and that, I think, is the first honest thing I have done in this house since I was 11 years old.
Soon after, Harriet Coggan drove Abigail into Brattleboro. Abigail had asked, quietly, if Harriet might come with her to the public library. Harriet, concerned, kind, looked her over and said gently that she had gone awful pale, and that she would come. Abigail told her she needed to look up a newspaper from 1932. She would rather not go alone, she said. Thank you. The Brattleboro Library had a microfiche reader in a back room that smelled of warm dust and the small acrid scent of overheated electrical wire. Harriet wound the dial. Abigail watched the columns of 1932 newsprint slide past. They found it in the entertainment section of the March 12th edition. A small photograph. 2 young men in dark suits, holding instruments. The caption read, Hollander Brothers perform at Boston Benefit. Jonas Hollander, fiddle. Silas Hollander, guitar. Silas in the photograph was 34 years old. His hair was still dark. His face was less lined. But the eyes were unmistakable. The slight tilt of the head was unmistakable. The crescent-shaped scar on the back of his left wrist, just visible above the cuff of the suit jacket, was unmistakable. Harriet said very quietly, Lord have mercy, honey, that she did not think Abigail should drive home alone. Abigail, after a long moment, politely firm, asked her to print this, please. She would not be driving alone, she said. Harriet would be in the car beside her. Harriet drove. Abigail sat in the passenger seat with the printed photograph folded into thirds inside the pocket of her wool coat. The pearl earrings were back on her ears. She did not remember putting them on that morning, but they were there, the way certain pieces of evidence become attached to a body without the body's full consent. They reached the orchard at dusk. Harriet asked, twice, if Abigail wanted her to come in. Abigail said no, twice. Harriet drove off slowly, watching in her rear-view mirror, until the Lincoln was a small white shape against the dark of the barn. Abigail walked across the side yard to the barn. She had not asked herself on the drive home what she was going to do. She did not need to. Her feet were already doing it. The barn was empty. Silas had been gone for 2 days. He had told her the previous Friday that he was driving down to Bennington to pick up 2 oak boards he could not find locally. He was expected back Thursday. It was Wednesday now. His workbench stood neatly arranged in the soft red glow of the kerosene lamp she had left burning that morning. A canvas tool roll, a planer, 3 different chisels, oiled and sleeping, a scrap of pencil, a small spiral notepad. And on the worn cedar surface of the workbench, half tucked under a piece of curled shaving, was an envelope, white paper, unsealed flap, addressed in his hand. Abigail's hand reached out and lifted it. She did not hurry. She felt very calm, the way a person feels in the moment just after a glass has fallen and not yet hit the floor. The envelope was addressed to a Boston street she knew. Number 12, Lewisburg Square, her mother's house. The house Abigail had been raised in. The house in which Rosalind Wexley had died 2 years and 1 month previously. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded in thirds. The date at the top read August 6, 1962, 18 months before Rosalind's death.
Rosalind, I have found her. I will go to Vermont in the spring. I will take work at the orchard if she is there. I will say nothing of what we are to each other. I will not ask her for anything. I will only watch, the way you asked me to watch. I am sorry it took 20 years.
Abigail folded the letter back into thirds. She did not cry. She did not sit down. She turned and walked, slowly, out of the barn and across the yard and into the kitchen and up the stairs and into her mother's bedroom. She placed the photograph from the library and the unsealed letter from the workbench on the quilt next to her mother's bundle of unsent letters. The 3 items together looked, in the lamplight, like the small organized scene of a small organized crime. She sat on the edge of the bed. She put her face in her hands. She did not cry then either. The crying would come later, in pieces, over a long winter. That night, only the shaking came. An hour later, she heard the green pickup come up the road. The headlights swung across the upstairs window. The engine cut. A door opened and closed. She went down the stairs in her stocking feet. The bundle of letters and the photograph and his envelope clutched against her chest. She opened the kitchen door before he could knock. Silas Hollander stood on the cedar bench he had built her. His cap was in both hands. He had begun to smile. He saw her face. The smile stopped.
Mr. Hollander, I want you off this property by morning. You will leave the tools in the barn. You will not speak to me. You will not return.
Silas, very quietly, head lowering, said only, "Yes, ma'am." He did not say anything else. He did not protest. He did not ask what had happened. He did not need to ask. His face in that moment was the face of a man who had known this evening would come and had been preparing for it in some quiet interior chapel of himself for 37 years. He nodded once. He put his cap on. He turned. He walked back across the yard to his green Ford pickup. His shoulders, in the half-light from the kitchen door, were not the shoulders of a defeated man. They were the shoulders of a man who had agreed, in advance, to lose. The barn door closed behind him with a single dry click. The engine started. The headlights swept the yard. The truck rolled out down the dirt road. The taillights disappeared around the bend at the bottom of the hill, two small red embers in the November dark. Abigail Wexley stood in the open kitchen doorway in her stocking feet, holding her mother's letters and a photograph and the worst envelope of her life, and the cold November air came in through the open door, and she did not move to close it for almost an hour. 3 days passed. Snow came again. This time, the heavier kind. The kind that closes a road. Abigail did not go out. She did not light the parlor lamp. She kept the kitchen stove burning, and she sat at the small table by the window in her mother's old wool shawl, and she read the rest of the letters. There were 31 of them. They spanned 16 years. They began as the letters of a young woman frightened of her own engagement. They became the letters of a young wife frightened of her own marriage. They became the letters of a mother frightened of what she had been forced to teach her daughter. And then they became, gradually, the letters of an old woman, frightened of having spent a life in the wrong room. One letter, dated July of 1934, when Abigail had been 3 years old, read like this.
Jonas, the baby is sleeping. She is the most beautiful child I have ever seen. I will not say she is yours, because she is not. But sometimes when she sleeps with her small hand under her chin, I see your face. I do not know if that is grief or imagination. I am not certain there is a difference.
Abigail read that letter twice. She set it down. She looked out at the snow. She felt for the first time in 11 months a clean, uncomplicated grief that had nothing in it of duty. On the 4th day, she found the line that broke her open. It was in a letter dated September of 1956. Abigail would have been 27, married for 4 years, the mother of a child who had died at 6 months old, a fact Rosalind had never spoken aloud in this house, and would not speak aloud anywhere.
Jonas, you were the only one who ever asked what I wanted, and I was too afraid to answer. I have spent 30 years teaching my daughter the answers she was supposed to give. I am ashamed. I am so ashamed.
Abigail closed the packet. She tied the ribbon. She walked to the small closet under the stairs, and she pulled out her 2 leather suitcases, and she set them open on the iron bed. She began to pack. She would drive back to Boston Tuesday morning. She would put the orchard on the market. She would sell the farmhouse. She would never come back to Vermont as long as she lived. She did not yet know what she would tell herself she was doing. She did not yet know that the anger she was feeling, the anger so clean and hot it surprised her, was not anger at Silas Hollander at all.
I am angry at you, Mother. I am angry at you for writing those letters and never sending them. I am angry at you for teaching me to set a table the way you set a table, while you sat upstairs at noon and wrote to a man whose name was not my father's. I am angry at you for dying without telling me. I am angry at you for asking, instead, a stranger to come to my orchard and shake me out of my own life, because you were too kind, or too cowardly, or too proper to do it yourself. I do not know which of those 3 it was. Perhaps it was all 3. Perhaps that is what we do. The women in this family, we send a stranger to do the kindness we should have done ourselves. Well, The stranger is gone now. The stranger left because I told him to leave. And here I am, packing for a road I am not going to take. I am angry, Mother. I am angry. And I am, for the first time in my life, in this kitchen, with the snow coming down outside, the closest I have ever been to being honest with you. The honesty hurts. I will perhaps get used to it. I will have to. There is no one else now who can teach me how to live.
Late in the week, Harriet Coggan appeared at the kitchen door. Harriet stood at the door with a tin of biscuits and said gently that she had heard Abigail had not been seen and had thought she would check. Abigail let her in, telling her she had been reading, telling her the kettle was on. Abigail told her. The whole thing, the letters, the photograph, the unsealed envelope on the workbench, the carpenter's confession in his own hand, written to her dead mother 18 months before that woman had died. The fact that he had not come for the orchard. The fact that he had not come for her. The fact that he had come, very deliberately, to spend a season in her life, and that he had done it under a covering of deceit, and that she had begun, somewhere in the middle of November, to think she might love him, and that she would now have to spend the next 20 years unthinking that thought, line by line, the way her mother had spent 40 years writing unsent letters.
Honey, I'm going to say something. You can hate me for it later if you want. Some men play villain like it is a trade. They start at 14. They do not know any other line of work. That one out there, that Silas, that one does not strike me as the trade type. That one strikes me as the favor type. A man who plays villain on purpose is doing it for somebody. He is not getting paid in money. He is getting paid in some other coin. Could be guilt, could be debt, could be love, could be all three.
He lied to me, Harriet. How do I tell the difference?
He surely did. And I have known 3 men in my life who lied to me for my own good, and one of them was my husband. They are not the same kind of liar as the ones who lie for theirs. You let them speak. You let them speak, and then you watch what their hands do.
Harriet stayed another half hour. She did not say anything else of consequence. She washed her teacup at the kitchen sink before she left. She paused at the door. Harriet paused at the door and said very quietly that whatever Abigail did, she should do for herself. Not for him, not for her mother, for herself. And for once. Harriet laughed. Abigail stood in the kitchen for a long time. Then she walked over to the wood stove. The fire was low. The iron lid on the top was warm but not hot. She took the pearl earrings out of her ears. She held them in her palm. The lamplight caught the small, darker freckle on the left pearl. The one her mother had said no 2 pearls ever quite agreed on. She thought, for one long instant, about lifting the iron lid and dropping them onto the burning coals beneath. She did not. She set them down on the warm lid of the wood stove instead. She watched them sit there, 2 small pale things on a black iron field. She turned. She walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs and into bed without removing her clothes. She slept badly. She woke at 4 in the morning. She lay listening, to the slow tick of the iron bedstead settling in the cold, and to the distant call of an owl somewhere in the pines beyond the barn. She thought about her mother. She thought about Silas. She thought about her husband, dead 11 months. She thought about the child she had buried in 1956. She thought about the woman she would be in the spring if she sold the orchard and drove back to Boston, and never spoke of any of this again. She did not like that woman. She had been that woman for 34 years. She could not, this morning, locate within herself a single reason to be that woman for one more day. She got up at 5. She made coffee. She loaded her suitcases into the back of the Lincoln. She told herself she was still leaving, because telling herself the truth all at once was too much to ask in one night, and she had been raised to break the truth into small, manageable pieces. The first violet light of the November dawn came up over the orchard at 6:40. The Lincoln was packed. The keys were in her coat pocket. She walked one last time around the side of the barn, telling herself she was checking that the door was latched, and she stopped because she could not help herself in front of the iron shelter door at the back of the barn. The padlock chain was still rusted. The door was still sealed. Her father had been gone 7 years. The shelter had been waiting for 10 years. The shelter had nothing in it that could help her. And yet, the seed sentence rose up in her, almost not in words. Do not wait until the bomb shelter door opens. The moment your conscience warns you like a shooting star, the change has already begun. She walked back to the kitchen at 6:45. She stood at the wood stove. The pearl earrings were still on the iron lid where she had set them 4 days before. She had not been able to bring herself to move them. Outside, the dirt road made a sound she knew. The slow, patient sound of a 1953 Ford pickup coming up the hill in low gear. Silas Hollander parked at the bottom of the porch steps. He did not come up to the door right away. He sat in the cab of the truck for a long minute with his cap on. He was carrying something heavy in his lap, both arms around it. Through the kitchen window, Abigail could see the shape of an old metal strongbox and, beside it on the seat, a small unfinished wooden object she could not yet identify. He got out. He climbed the porch steps. He knocked once, very softly, on the kitchen door. She opened the door. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them spoke for almost 10 seconds.
Mrs. Wexley, I would like to come inside. I will leave when you ask me to. I will not raise my voice. I have come to tell you the truth, the whole of it.
Abigail, after a long moment, stepped back and told him to come in. He came in. He set the strongbox on the kitchen table. He set the wooden object beside it. He took off his cap. He did not sit until she nodded. Then he sat in the chair across from her. The first gray light of the morning was coming in through the lace curtain over the kitchen window. He folded his hands on the table in front of him. The crescent-shaped scar on the back of his left wrist was visible at the cuff of his flannel shirt, the same scar that had been visible in the 1932 photograph from the Brattleboro library.
I am Silas Quincey Hollander. I was born in 1897 in a town called Wilmington, Vermont. I had one brother. His name was Jonas. He was 4 years older than me. He played fiddle. I played guitar. We traveled the New England circuit for 13 years, playing church halls and benefits and small dances. In 1927, at a benefit at Boston Symphony Hall, my brother met a young woman named Rosalind Burnham. She was 23. She was engaged to be married to a man named Charles Wexley. My brother loved her. She loved him. She told him so in a letter she wrote to him in February of 1928, after her family had told her she could not see him again. He gave that letter to me when he went off to the war. He kept it in his service pocket the whole way to Italy. He died at Anzio in February of 1944. The letter came back to me with his effects. In March of 1928, 3 months before your mother married Charles Wexley, my brother bought a pair of small freshwater pearl earrings from a jeweler on Court Street in Boston. He spent a month of his wages on them. He sent the earrings to your mother as a wedding gift. They were the only gift she received that nobody else knew the giver of. She wore them at her wedding. She wore them twice more in her life. She gave them to you on the day you married Mr. Wexley in 1932, and she told you to wear them when you finally knew who you were. I know she told you that because she wrote it to my brother in 1933. She wrote everything to my brother for 40 years, and she never sent a single letter because she had given her word.
Abigail did not interrupt. Her hands were folded in her lap under the table. She had stopped feeling her hands.
After my brother died, I tried to find your mother. It took me 4 years. I wrote her in 1948. She wrote back. We wrote perhaps 4 times a year from that year until she died. We never met in person. I did not want to make her break the promise she had made to my brother to stay where she was. In 1962, 18 months before she died, she wrote me a letter. I have it here. I will leave it with you when I go. The letter said that her daughter had been raised to give the answer she had given. The letter said that her daughter was going to inherit the orchard and was very likely going to bury herself in Boston with her dead husband and her dead mother and her good manners. The letter asked me a favor. She asked me to come to the orchard. She asked me to make her daughter angry enough to choose herself. Those were her words. Make her angry enough to choose herself. Do not let her stay out of gratitude. Do not let her stay because she thinks she owes the dead anything. The dead do not need her. The dead want her gone.
His voice cut only slightly when he said it. I took the favor. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a single crow called once over the orchard. Silas put one hand on the brass key around his neck, on the worn leather cord, and he lifted it over his head. He laid it carefully on the table between them. Then he opened the strongbox.
I placed the 1932 newspaper photograph in the church library file 2 months ago. I knew Harriet would find it. I knew she would take you. I left the unsealed letter on my workbench last Thursday afternoon. I knew you would come into the barn that evening. I carved the date, 1828, into the underside of the cradle on the workbench because I knew sooner or later you would turn that cradle over. I planted those 3 things, Mrs. Wexley. I planted them so you would find them. I lied to you so you could leave.
Abigail had not moved. She was looking at his face. She was watching, very carefully, what his hands were doing.
Whether you leave the orchard, or whether you leave the woman they raised you to be, that part was never mine to choose. That part was yours to choose. My job was only to make sure you could choose it. I owe my brother that. I owe your mother that. I do not owe it to you. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am asking only that you understand. I will go now.
He pushed the strongbox toward her. He pushed the small, unfinished wooden object beside it. She looked at it for the first time. It was a cradle. A child's cradle. Perhaps the size for a 6-month-old infant. The wood was a pale honey color. The joints were half cut. One end panel had been started and abandoned. The carving along the top rail was a single repeating curve, the same curve as the back rail of the cedar bench by her kitchen door, the same curve as the apple in profile.
My brother started that cradle in 1928. He stopped when she married. He finished one end after the war started. He died before he could come home. I have carried it for 21 years. I would like you to have it. Not for any reason of obligation, only because it has waited long enough.
He stood. He picked up his cap. He looked at her for one more long moment. Then he turned and walked toward the door. Abigail's voice stopped him at the threshold. It came out smaller than she had meant it to, and steadier than she had thought it would be.
Mr. Hollander, did you love her too?
Silas Hollander stood very still in the kitchen doorway. The first sunlight of the morning had begun to come in low across the orchard, and it caught the side of his face, and for a moment, Abigail could see, very clearly, the brother in him. The brother she had never met. The brother her mother had wept for in private for 40 years.
I loved my brother, and I loved the woman who made my brother into a man who could love. That is the only truth I have to give you, Mrs. Wexley. I do not have any other one.
Abigail nodded once. She did not stand. She did not speak again. Silas Hollander put on his cap. He stepped out of the kitchen. The screen door closed softly behind him. She heard his footsteps on the cedar bench he had built her. She heard them go down the porch stairs. She heard the door of the Ford close. She heard the engine start. She heard the truck back up, turn, and roll out down the dirt road in low gear. She heard the engine fade. She heard, after a long while, the silence resettle on the kitchen. Then she stood. She walked over to the wood stove. The 2 pearl earrings were still sitting on the warm iron lid, where she had set them 4 days ago. She picked them up. She held them in her closed hand against her chest for a long time. The metal of the posts was cool. The pearls were warm. She did not put them back on her ears. Not yet. She set them down, gently, on top of the unsealed letter from 1962. She sat down at the kitchen table, across from the strongbox and the unfinished cradle, and her brother's brass key, and her own life, all of which were now sitting together on a single oak surface in a Vermont farmhouse kitchen at 7:15 on a November morning in 1965. Then she did something she had not done in 2 years. She put her face in her hands, and she cried. The crying was not large and not loud. It was the small, steady weeping of a woman who has finally been told the answer to a question her body has been asking for 56 years. The answer was kinder than she had expected. The answer was also late. Two weeks passed. Abigail did not go to Boston. She did not unpack the suitcases either, not at first. They sat in the front hall like two patient brown dogs that had agreed to wait. She did the small things. She fed the wood stove. She made bread, badly, 3 times, and the 4th loaf was decent. She drank her coffee on the cedar bench in the mornings. She walked the orchard in the afternoons. She did not know yet what she would say, not to Boston, not to him. She had been raised to never speak until she did. That much, at least, she would keep. On a Tuesday morning in early December, on a bright, cold day that smelled of wood smoke and the first promise of snow, Abigail walked out into the orchard with the small garden trowel and the velvet box and her wool coat buttoned all the way up. She walked to the northwest corner of the property. There was an old apple tree there, the biggest one on the place, a northern spy planted by her father in 1923, the year he had bought the orchard, the year she had been born. The tree was 42 years old. Its trunk was the thickness of 2 men standing back to back. Its branches still held a few of last fall's small dry apples, the late hangers, the ones the wind had forgotten. She knelt at the base. The ground was hard at the surface but turned softer under the trowel. She dug a shallow hole at the place where the largest root broke the soil, perhaps 3 inches deep. She took the velvet box out of her coat pocket. She opened it. She removed one of the 2 pearl earrings, the left one, the one with the tiny darker freckle near the drill hole, the one no 2 pearls would ever quite agree on. She held it in her gloved palm for a long moment.
Mother, you stood at the stone garden wall in Beacon Hill in 1928, in the cream silk drop waist dress, and these were in your ears, and a man whose name I never knew was watching you from somewhere I cannot now imagine. Jonas. I have learned his name. He stood at a jeweler's counter on Court Street and counted out a month of his wages, and asked the man, very politely, to wrap them in tissue paper rather than cotton. He knew the cotton would catch on the freshwater finish. He knew. He was that careful with you. And you wore them at your wedding to my father, because they were the only honest thing you were wearing. And now I am returning the left one to the soil my father bought, the year you said yes to him, the year I was born. I am keeping the right one. I am keeping it because, finally, it is mine. The freckle stays here. The clean pearl comes with me. That is how I will carry you, Mother. Half buried, half present. That, I think, is the only honest way a daughter can carry a mother who lived the life you lived.
She placed the single pearl earring into the shallow hole at the base of the old northern spy tree. She covered it with soil. She patted the soil flat. She closed her fist around the second earring in her pocket. She said, very quietly, to the tree, to the ground, to nobody, that that much was theirs and the rest was hers. She walked back across the orchard. Half of Jonas's gift had returned to the soil of New England, into the roots of a tree planted by a Wexley man who had built a fallout shelter against a war that never came. And the other half of Jonas's gift was in her right coat pocket against her hand, traveling with her toward whatever the next thing was going to be. She said it then to herself, very low, half here, half with me. That was, perhaps, the only fair way to carry a gift her mother had never let herself open. She did not go back to the farmhouse. She walked into the barn instead. She passed the workbench where the cedar bench had once been made. She passed the wood shavings he had not bothered to sweep up. She passed the small unfinished cradle which she had moved off the kitchen table and onto a quilt in the corner where it had begun to wait again, more patient this time. She walked to the back left corner of the barn. She moved the stack of feed sacks her father had laid down in 1955. She knelt by the iron door of the fallout shelter. She took from her coat pocket a small steel hacksaw she had bought the previous Friday at the Brattleboro hardware store. It took her 40 minutes to saw through the rusted chain on the padlock. Her arm was tired by the end. Her hair was coming down. She sat back on her heels. The chain fell apart with a single small dry clatter onto the dirt floor. The padlock dropped beside it. The door was free. He lifted it. The hinges complained but turned. The door went up. The shelter beneath opened to the cold yellow light of the barn afternoon. A small set of wooden steps led down. She climbed down. The shelter was small, 8 feet by 10. The air smelled of cool earth and the faint, sweet ghost of mothballs. There was a single empty cot against the back wall. A small kerosene heater on a tin tray. A 1955 Sears Roebuck calendar pinned to the unfinished concrete wall. The months of November and December unflipped. Frozen at autumn the year the shelter had been built and abandoned the same week. On the small wooden shelf above the cot, there was a single piece of paper, yellowed, folded once. Abigail unfolded it. It was a child's drawing, a house, a tree, 2 stick figures holding hands. The figures were labeled in pencil, in a child's careful printing. Father, Mother. Above the house, written in the same careful pencil, a single line.
If a bomb comes, we will all be safe in here. Love, Abby. 1955.
47 years later, on a Tuesday afternoon in December, she sat down on the cot. She held the drawing in both hands. She had been 11 years old. She had drawn it for her father on the night he had finished the shelter. He had kept it. He had taken it down here. He had pinned it on the shelf. He had locked the door behind him and never mentioned it, and she had not remembered the drawing existed until that moment in the cold afternoon light, 47 years later. The shelter, she understood, was not where safety lived. The shelter had never been where safety lived. The shelter was only a small earth room a frightened father had built to hold a small piece of his frightened daughter's heart.
You did not lock me out, Father. You locked me in. You were a frightened man. You built me a room I would never need against a bomb that would never come, and you locked the smallest version of me inside it, because that was the version you knew how to love. I understand now. I am not angry. I was angry yesterday. I was angry this morning. I am not angry now. The shelter is only an earth room. The earth room is only what a frightened father builds when he does not yet know that love is not a wall. Love is a door. You did not know that. Mother did not know that. I did not know that either, until a man I cannot have, whose name I will not now say, came up a dirt road in a forest green Ford pickup and held open a door I had been waiting 56 years to walk through, and now I have come to collect myself. I will leave the door open behind me. The next girl who comes down those wooden steps, in whatever century, will not have to saw through any chain to find what I left her. Which is, perhaps, the most honest gift I will ever leave.
She put the drawing carefully into her coat pocket beside the second pearl earring. She climbed back up the wooden steps. She left the shelter door open behind her. She walked out of the barn into the December sunlight. The light, that afternoon, was the soft pale gold the late autumn light becomes in New England in the second week of December. She had not noticed that quality of light in any conscious way for 34 years. She noticed it now. She walked back to the farmhouse. At the front door, she stopped on the cedar bench. She took the second pearl earring out of her right pocket. She fitted it into her left ear. The left ear, where there had been the left earring, the one with the small darker freckle, was bare now. The asymmetry settled against her. It felt right. It felt like the most honest thing she had worn in 56 years. Through the winter that followed, which was, as Harriet had predicted, a hard one, Abigail learned to bank a stove fire so it would hold through a 13-hour January night. She learned which barn cats were worth keeping and which would lose her chickens. She learned to drive a tractor, badly at first, then competently, taught by a teenage boy from the dairy farm who charged her in cider donuts. She read all of Rosalind's letters twice more. She did not destroy them. She put them in a small cedar chest in the closet under the stairs. She wrote to Mr. Pellicane in January. She instructed him to sell the Beacon Hill house, the furniture, the silver, the porcelain. She instructed him to keep the Chippendale desk and the small velvet jewelry box and her mother's botanical paintings. Everything else was to be sold. The money was to be put into an account in her name at the Brattleboro Savings and Loan. She intended, she wrote, to start a small business in the spring. She did not specify what kind. She did not, herself, yet know. Mr. Pellicane wrote back. His letter was 3 short, polite sentences and 1 unprofessional postscript. The only unprofessional postscript he had written in 40 years of practice. He said he would execute the instructions with the utmost discretion. He said her father would have been very proud. He said that her mother, if she might know such things, was already proud. He signed it, "Yours faithfully, Beaumont Pellicane." By the time the first crocuses pushed up through old snow in the 3rd week of April, the spring had come late. The maples flushed pink before they flushed green. The apple trees broke into blossom the 2nd week of May, 6 days behind schedule, in a way the old farmers called proper. Abigail had decided sometime in February what the business would be. She would keep the orchard, but she would not try to make it a living. She would let it be the back of the property. The front of the property, the long south-facing slope between the farmhouse and the dirt road, would become a flower farm. sweet peas, old garden roses, lupines, dahlias. The cottage flowers her mother had painted in private for 50 years. She would sell them at the Saturday market in Brattleboro from June to October. She would teach a small class at the Grange Hall in the winters on botanical drawing, using her mother's portfolio of unsigned watercolors as the syllabus. She would call the business Wexley Cottage Flowers. And in very small letters at the bottom of the sign, where most people would never notice, she would write the words, Rosalind's Garden, in tribute to a woman who had spent 50 years painting flowers nobody had let her plant. On a warm morning in early May, Abigail was kneeling among the first row of newly planted lupine saplings when she heard Harriet Coggan call her from the fence.
Abigail Wexley, I told you you would last the winter. Have you got time for coffee, or are you still being a horticulturalist?
Abigail laughed softly, full and low, and told her she absolutely had. She was being both, she said. She invited Harriet around the back. The kettle was on. Harriet walked along the fence to the gate. Abigail watched her come. The wind moved through the orchard. Harriet, quietly eyeing the single earring, said Abigail had only got the one in. Abigail answered softly, without turning her head. She did, yes. The other one was where it belonged. She was no longer a woman in a hurry, she said. She did not think she ever would be again. Harriet, after a moment, very gentle, warm, said only "ya." That sounded about right to her. Good. The Lupins, she said, would thank Abigail for it. The single pearl earring caught the morning light at Abigail's left ear. The right ear was bare, and had been bare since December. The asymmetry was the new self. The asymmetry was the answer.
I did not finish the cradle. I do not know if I will. He carried it 21 years. I think I am only meant to keep it now. Not to finish it. Just to let it be in the room with me. The way my mother kept those letters. Not to send, only to write. There's a kind of honoring, I am beginning to understand, that does not require completion. That is a hard thing for a woman raised the way I was raised to admit. We were taught that everything must be finished. The dinner must be finished. The dishes must be finished. The morning must be finished on a schedule in private. But the cradle, Harriet, the cradle is not for finishing. The cradle is for sitting in the back parlor of a Vermont farmhouse on a quilt in the morning light and being looked at by a woman who is finally not in a hurry. I think that is the work of the rest of my life. The looking, not the finishing. Some things perhaps are meant only to wait, not to be finished.
Harriet said nothing for a long moment. Then she said softly, "Ahu?" That was about right. She thought of Silas. Sometimes, in the morning, when the light caught the cedar bench by the kitchen door in a certain way. She thought of him with neither anger nor longing. She thought of him the way you think of the person who had handed you the small, honest mirror you had needed to see yourself in. She wished him well. She did not need him to know that she did. The wishing was for herself. She had been raised, finally, into a woman who could wish a thing for herself. On the morning of the last day of May, Abigail Wexley walked out at dawn to the northwest corner of the orchard to the old northern spy planted in 1923. She knelt at its base. The roots were greening with the spring grass. The hole where she had buried the single pearl earring had long since closed itself. She did not dig there. She did not need to. She laid one hand on the bark. She closed her eyes. The single remaining earring caught the first light of the sun rising over the east ridge. Far away, somewhere on the New England circuit, Silas Hollander was probably making coffee in the cab of his 1953 Ford pickup. The brass key on the leather cord was no longer around his neck. He had left it on the kitchen table that November morning. It hung now on a small iron hook beside Abigail's parlor window. It did not open anything in her life. It did not need to. It was only a small piece of evidence that two men, brothers, had loved one woman across 40 years, and that something of that love had finally found its way home to the soil it had been bought from. Abigail stood. She walked back across the orchard toward the farmhouse. The morning smelled of new grass and lupines, and the faint, cool ghost of late frost on the lower slope. The kitchen window glowed pale yellow with the lamp she had left burning. Do not wait until the bomb shelter door opens. The moment your conscience warns you like a shooting star, the change has already begun. Her change had begun on a porch in Vermont, on the day a stranger had looked at her mother's earrings and gone somewhere far away.
The going was the beginning. The arriving has taken 7 months. The arriving is not finished. The arriving, I am beginning to understand, is the rest of my life. There is no destination. There is only the arriving. I wear one pearl now. I wear it for me. The other pearl is in the ground, and the ground will keep it. And the keeping is not loss. The keeping is only how a woman finally lets her mother rest. I do not know if I will see him again. I think, in some small honest part of me, that I will not. The man who plays the villain on purpose is not a man who comes back. He came in once. He opened the door. He left the door open. He went on his route. That is how that kind of man loves a woman. He does it once, very deliberately, and then he goes. I do not blame him. I do not, this morning, on this bench, in this light, miss him in the way I have missed people in my life. I miss him only the way one misses a season. The autumn has gone. The autumn was honest. The autumn taught me everything the spring is now letting me use.
She walked up the porch steps. She sat on the cedar bench. She drank her coffee. The single pearl in her left ear caught the rising sun, and the place where the other pearl had been was bare to the morning, the way a window is bare to the morning when a long-held curtain has been finally and gently drawn back. Some lives are arranged so carefully that you forget to ask who arranged them. Some lives are unarranged, very slowly, by a single steady hand. And some lives, the rarest kind, are the lives a woman finally arranges for herself in the small, honest light of a Vermont morning, with one pearl earring in and one pearl earring under the roots of the oldest tree on her own land. This was the story of 47 days in 1965, and of every quiet morning that came after. If this story stayed with you, you are already one of us here at the Porch Light. We would love to hear which moment moved you. Leave it in the comments below.